found out why my apartment was so cheap. The summer usually pays out. This year I came stumbling empty-pocketed into fall. Cassie and I had just split up. I seemed to be able to sense the end of things, or cause them. It's so easy to believe in something, love, or escape, and never look the other direction as you venture up that road. And when you finally turn and look back down the road, you see your dull-eyed self through the windshield staring into space, oblivious that you're the one behind the wheel. Cassie was blindsided. She filled her tears, screaming about a wasted 8 months, about the fake promises and the lies. I swear I didn't lie, at least no more than I was lying to myself. The words were always an empty attempt at comfort. She asked why I ever told her she could move in with me. Instead I told her she looked like she needed help. I knew I was projecting. I couldn't afford the rent on my own anymore. I spent the past month stonewalling her, ignoring everything she said, just to stay comfortable. I walked out on her, muffling her screams with the closing door. I came back hours later to half her home. Her final box was packed and gone. So was I. I spent no more than 10 minutes online before I found a new place. Call it serendipity, apathy, whatever. I had a place half the rent of the apartment I shared with Cass. Summer ended and I was starting over. The place didn't seem too bad. It was a pretty standard apartment complex off a back road where I was one of 8 tenants. I felt a little out of place as I noticed all of my neighbours were a bit geriatric. I should have asked more questions before signing the lease, but I don't think that would have changed my mind. Half the rent of my old place wasn't just nice, it was necessary. I picked up on the sad, aged eyes peering through the blinds as I unpacked the truck. There was also a hospice van that frequented the parking lot. The final tell was that fetid, indescribable old people smell, somewhere between the rot of receding gums and boiled cabbage. I learned from the landlord, reluctantly, that my apartment was available and affordable because the previous tenant had passed away. An elderly woman, roughly 80, had lived there with a grandson who doubled as her caretaker. She passed just a few days prior to the renewal of their lease. I guess he just left just 2 days ago. Surprisingly, a cleaning crew was able to come in within that 48-hour window and clean the place. It was impressively sterile, despite the smell that crept in from the hallway. My first night at the new apartment was quiet. I finished a 6-pack of hard cider and passed out on the couch, intentionally, might I add, since I didn't unpack a single thing and my mattress was still leaning on the wall of the newly vacant bedroom. I didn't really have any furniture other than my couch and TV, and I didn't really need more. That night I dreamt of Cass. We were at our old place. She was in tears, screaming at me, but the words came out in a whisper. I said nothing back, slamming the door in her face. She began pounding on the door voraciously. Her screams became cries, became wails, and the pounding turned to fervent scratching. I woke in a sweat. In my ears the scratching still rang. No, there was an actual scratching coming from behind the couch. A scratching that invaded my dream. Disturbed and annoyed, I pulled the couch away from the wall. Nothing. The scratching continued. I found the opposite side of the wall of the bedroom closet. Flicking on the closet light, I crouched down to the baseboards. Still nothing. It was coming from inside the wall. Rats? I really should have asked more questions. It was now 4 AM, too late or too early to fall back asleep. I watched videos on my phone for the better half of the next hour before pulling my stagnant bones from the couch to get ready for work. Work was foggy. I suppose that was a best case scenario, as I was only physically present at the cubicle. Mid-shift, my head began throbbing over my dream from the previous night. I would have called it a hangover if I hadn't already been up since 4 AM. I left work, determined to keep my mind busy and unpack all my stuff. It didn't help. I was unboxing the few kitchen items I had. A couple of forks, a single spoon, a frying pan, and the panini press Cass got for me that one day I told her I was tired of making eggs for every meal. I put it on top of the fridge. As I pulled my hand back, a Polaroid fell out onto the floor. Picking it up and dusting it off, I recognised the setting immediately, albeit nothing else. I leaned around the corner to double check, and sure enough, the photo was definitely staged in the living room. Yet somehow, the empty sterility of my living room had more life in it than the bleak photograph I was looking at. On a couch sat an elderly woman, eyes glossed over, staring at an old tube television set, while a middle-aged woman coercingly tried to spoon-feed her mashed potatoes. Leaning on the opposite armrest, head in hand, sat a teenage boy in faded blue jeans and a baggy hoodie. The photo was dated Des 15 in the bottom right corner, and I noticed a little nutcracker on the end table. I put the photo back on the fridge. It felt wrong to throw out the personal effects of someone who had passed. It was not my job to dispose of the dead. Disposable camera. Ha. I chuckled at the irony. By the time I had finished unpacking, it was dark out, so I drove to the store, picked up some beer, and put Fight Club on. It was the only movie that survived the move. I dozed off on the couch and again fell right back into last night's dream. Cass was scratching at the door, wailing at the top of her lungs. "Let me speak! Everything was fine! Let me speak! Everything was fine!" She screamed until her voice gave out, clawing chunks out of the wood while I stood there, opposite the door, unmoved. Eventually, with one swift pound, the door came crashing down, hingeless, nearly taking me with it. There stood Cass, bound and gagged, with tape over her mouth, hands and feet wrapped at their weakest points in a thin nylon rope. The image startled me awake. It didn't make any sense. Well, truthfully, I avoided making sense of it, because my gut already told me the answer. Thinking back to our last fight, we never had closure. She was right, everything had seemed fine. That's when I heard it again, the quiet scratches of the rats in the wall. They must have been feeding that messed up dream. It was a constant, subtle scratch right at the baseboard. The more I listened, the more I picked up on a second sound, a faint hollow knock against the baseboard and a soft scurry. That just meant I had at least a few large friends in there. I resolved to setting up my bed, closed my closet door, and slept soundly through the rest of the night. Work was equally unfulfilling the following day. 2 nights of restless sleep rendered me completely useless. I don't know what was heavier on my mind, the rats or the breakup, but both kept me from work. I stopped at the store on the way home to pick up some mouse traps. I got one for the living room, one for my bedroom, and one in the kitchen, just in case. I made grilled cheese for dinner using the panini press from above the fridge. Morbid curiosity had me grabbing the Polaroid once more and studying its disquiet. I wondered about the life of the middle-aged woman. I wonder what happened to her, since it was just the other 2 who lived here before I moved in. I wondered if it was the elderly woman's apartment, and the woman and her son came to visit, or if the 3 lived here together. Did the young man choose to take care of the old woman, or was it pushed on him with the promise of a place to live? Sometimes we get roped into things we don't care to challenge because it's easier. Constantly wagering comfort, I thought of Cass and chased the thought down with the last bite of my grilled cheese. Things grew easier with time. Over the next 2 weeks, the scratching subsided. Strangely enough, I checked the mousetraps daily, and not a single one was ever triggered. I didn't complain, since without the scratching, I started sleeping easier. I thought less and less of Cass, and she visited my dreams less frequently. Yet every time she did, it was the same scenario. Cass would be scratching or pounding, begging to be let in, yet I would just stand there idle and useless. Then one day, the dreams just stopped. Unfortunately, I learned how I earned the silence in my apartment. One day as I got home from work, I opened the front door to a subtle stench, different from the old person smell in the hallway. I brushed it off as sour food the lower tenant was preparing, maybe a bad egg, or some culturally traditional meal my nose was ignorant of. My grandmother was Polish, and I remember dreading our weekly visit as a child because her place always stunk of some sort of fermented soup or sauerkraut casserole or something. I don't remember, I never ate much. I would just push it around my plate pretending it was good. The stench sparked a familiar loss of appetite. I resolved to picking up Burger King on my way back from buying some Febreze and a candle. The candle worked for a while. I didn't bother with the smell because honestly, I didn't care that much. I wagered my comfort on disinfectants and candles that smelled like fresh laundry and honeydew. The stench continued to grow along with my disillusion. From rotten eggs grew a heavy smell of death and decay I could no longer ignore. Pairing the smell with the subsided scratching, it was clear what had transpired. The rats had died within my walls. After 3 weeks and 24 candles, I resolved to telling my landlord. That evening, after returning from work, I called my landlord. He shared my enthusiasm about the project and told me he could check it out in a week's time. It didn't sound like he believed me, or at least didn't care in the slightest. I couldn't blame him. If it wasn't for the now daily assault on my senses, I wouldn't have bothered at all. I snuffed the light from the burning candle within my fingers and crashed on the couch to an endless cycle of forensic files. I woke in the morning to a knock on the door, or so I thought. As I stirred, I looked at my phone. It was 8 AM on Saturday. My bones felt heavy, and I decided to wait for another knock before pulling myself off the couch. It never came. With a piqued curiosity, I got off the couch anyway and went to the door. I thought it could be my landlord. Maybe his schedule freed up, or he was in the neighbourhood and wanted to touch base about the rat issue, but I assumed he would have called first. I peeked through the eye hole. My joints stiffened and my blood coagulated. Through the hole, I caught sight of Cassie's rotting face. Skin peeling from her cheeks, eyes full of tears, a mouth bound with tape. Nevertheless, she spoke right through the tape and into my skull. Everything was fine until it wasn't. I threw open the door and heavy decay rushed into the room, knocking me to the floor. I wish I had valued those 2 weeks of respite, I thought, jolting awake in a sweat. It was 2 a.m, Saturday. I got up and checked the front door. Nothing. I knew it wasn't real, but I had to be sure. It felt so real. In place of the scratching, the awful smell seemed to create more visceral dreams. Now fully conscious, I felt a deep dread in my chest, one that I never previously woke with. It was that stupid rotten smell. I couldn't take it anymore. Cassie was right. Everything was fine until it wasn't. And now it wasn't. I drove to Walmart and grabbed the cheapest hand saw I could find. I threw some rubber gloves, bleach, and disinfectant into the basket as well. I was going to get these stupid rats out of my wall and out of my head for good. At 3 a.m, I removed all my belongings from the closet and took to sawing at the baseboards. Funny, I thought it would be more difficult, but the drywall felt flimsy and, as I punched through the square I cut into the wall, I felt dizzy. I reached into the hole I made and found purchase, not on the drywall, but on something soft and fuzzy. Peeking through the hole, I saw 2 fuzzy soles, toes perched upwards. I was staring at 2 occupied slippers and the sagging, rotting, liver-spotted ankles of a woman bound by thin nylon rope. I retched violently and threw up the contents of my stomach. The following half hour was a blur. I called the cops and continued to cut through the drywall. As the red and blue lights flashed through my windows, I finished the final cut. Behind the wall in my closet sat the body of the previous tenant, tape muting her mouth and grey hair. Her hands were bound behind her in the same rope. Splinters of wood jutted from her bloodied fingernails. Worn and weary from relentless feeble scratching at the inside of the baseboards. I threw up again. All that came out was bile and emptiness. Everything was fine, until it wasn't.